This is calling to mind a really major disruption that we're experiencing currently, which is the emergence of something like Bitcoin,
Yep.
which is disrupting one of the oldest businesses in the game, which is central banking. I'm curious because I want to tie this into like your work on the PayPal Mafia
Yeah.
too, because I know you said in the beginning they were basically trying to create a Bitcoin.
They were.
But it was a centralized business instead of this decentralized internet protocol. So they failed in their was this an express mission, implicit? I'm not sure. But so let's talk about that. Let me maybe story PayPal Mafia, how they wanted to build Bitcoin, and then I want to keep going on this thread too, because Bitcoin is this thing that's very disruptive to a very big and dark business.
Right.
And like, what kind of resistance do you expect us to see?
I mean, it's already happening. The SEC actions alone are kind of in over the last several years anyway, have been a little have been interesting, let's just say. So to take a step back, for people who are watching or listening, you've probably used PayPal. If you haven't, you've used Venmo, a product they own. Maybe you've used something else that's in that PayPal universe or orbit. This company is very old. It started in 1998, and it was basically created when the dot-com bubble was expanding, and then it was really created when the dot-com bubble burst. So kind of 98 to 02. The company's created in 98. It goes public in 02. And there's sort of two sides of this story. There's the Elon Musk side, and there's this side that includes people like Peter Thiel, Max Levchin, David Sachs, Reid Hoffman, Luke Nosek. Names that I imagine are actually more familiar to your audience than they are to a lot of other people. I mean, certainly everybody knows Elon, but but on the one of the conceptions of the business early on was the idea that they were creating a new world currency. And there were actually t-shirts, some that the alumni kept, where it says PayPal, a new world currency. They're like logo designs and stuff that had this. And so sort of like to unpack that a little, there were a couple people, particularly Luke Nosek, who were very forward-thinking about technology. There's this story that Peter Thiel tells, he told me as well, where one of the first things that happened when he interviewed Luke was that Luke had a life extension bracelet, like one of these Alcor bracelets, this company that was doing early, and I still think does life extension stuff. Not life extension, it's the idea that like if you die, they can preserve your
cryogenesis.
But for a life long after you're technically dead.
Okay.
And he had a bracelet, and they talked about that. Yeah. Luke has ideas like this that are thinking decades in the future. And one of the things that he really believed was that PayPal could replace world currencies. And in an early deck that I actually I found, and they gave me, there was this whole like system in which they were like, well, this will replace the Russian ruble, and this will replace like all fiat currencies, and we can take and part of the reason is because PayPal was created in the shadow of the East Asian financial crisis. So you had a ton of weird things happening with currencies, and people lost their savings overnight. Markets were gyrating because of this. And so in the face of that, these people are saying, look, well, everybody at this point, pretty soon everybody will have a good internet connection, even if it's a dial-up internet connection. We know that bits are cheaper than atoms. And we know that we can abstract dollars into bits. So why not try this? What happens is that ultimately both of these businesses that become PayPal, on the Elon side, it's this company called X.com. And on the Peter and Max side, it's called Confinity. They merge eventually to become PayPal. They get tested by the reality of the market. And what the market responds to is PayPal's ability for me to send you, Robert, money easily over email. So if I go into PayPal, I can type in your email address, I can send you $50, right? Back in 1999, that was novel. To do that fast and securely and cheaply, person to person, was super interesting. And it was super interesting to a specific corner of the internet. That corner of the internet was eBay, because eBay hadn't figured out its payment system yet. And so into this eBay Wild West, where people are sending each other, literally mailing cash, mailing checks, money orders, steps PayPal with this very seamless system by which I can pay you by email. And they're like, this is amazing. So it takes off there. Part of what happens when it takes off there is they have to legitimize their business. They have to go away from the ambition of becoming a new world currency and become a business that's very, very good That's a secure processing of peer-to-peer payment transactions that are consistent with existing laws and regulations. You know, they face everything. They face people trying to buy like drugs. What happens if I pay you, Robert, for drugs using PayPal? Well, PayPal's involved in that transaction. So they have the FBI get involved in their systems, et cetera. There are all these things that happen that lead PayPal, by the way, quite understandably, to become like a startup that builds a very good product and service. And the way you know it's a very good product and service is that it's still around in 2024. I mean, it's been what, 26 years? And this business is still here. And it's a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company. Like, it's not a knock on the creators of PayPal to say that they didn't successfully create Bitcoin.
Of course,
right?
Of course, yeah.
But the ambition, one of the ambitions at the outset, one of the things that was in the water, one of the things that were happening, the conversations that was taking place, is could we create something that eliminates the need for a currency, right? And it's then not subject to weird decisions by central banks. It's not subject to weird crises that happen overseas. And so there was a little bit of that. I'll tell one more quick story around this that is actually, I mean, it's one of those stories you're just like, oh boy, I wish I could get a time machine and go back in time. When PayPal's getting started, one of the things they play around with is early Palm Pilots. One of their first products is the ability to beam money from me to you through a Palm Pilot. Palm Pilots in that era, they the third generation they had these little infrared ports, kind of like remote control ports in the side.
Yeah.
One of the products that PayPal was created was actually secure transactions that I could do from my Palm Pilot to your Palm Pilot. So it was Venmo. It was Venmo before there was Venmo, right? So they go down to present the idea for this PDA, personal devices and whatever it is, PDA transactions in this cryptography, the International Financial Cryptography Conference in Anguilla. And it's like a gathering of like the world's like leading financial crypto people. And they're all there. Like it's like I don't even know how many people, but they're all collected in this one place. And to this day, Peter Thiel swears that if you were going to look for Satoshi in one place, it would have been at this conference. And so his suspicion is like, it's likely that he was in the same room as Satoshi. Like because it'd be the only place that somebody like Satoshi would be hanging out would be with this group of people. And you can actually look up this conference and you can see papers that were presented, and a lot of the echoes of the ideas of modern cryptocurrency were being talked about in the mid and late 90s around and in and around these sessions, right? And so you have there was eGold was around back then. There were eMoney Beam. There was DigiCash. DigiCash is Max Levchin, who's one of the co-founders of PayPal, actually attends the DigiCash bankruptcy party. And he said it had the feeling of like an Irish wake. But they attend this conference, and to this day, Peter's convinced. He's like, I bet Satoshi was there because it was a room it was not many people in the room, and it's in Anguilla, right, where there's all sorts of other things happening. Like it seems like it's sort of like if you're in it was sort of like the cantina bar scene in Star Wars. It's like somebody's in this room who could help me create Bitcoin. But just to get back to it was a long way of answering your question, but it is so clear that the PayPal founders had some of these ideas in their head around a global currency that was borderless, that was secure, that was going to make transactions cheaper. And I would add one more thing to this I didn't say already, which is Elon also had these ideas. So he's often been written out of the PayPal story. I spoke to him at length about what he did, and I think hopefully brought him back into the story. He plays a hugely important role. And his view, which is shared by a number of people, is that part of why PayPal matters is because it reduced transaction costs. Because what it did was it basically said like, wait, why should it cost me so much to accept credit card payments? Why should it cost me all this money when today I'm not moving like money in a mint? I'm not moving a physical good. All I'm doing is I'm moving bits. And he was joking with me. He's like, you're moving bits from one database to another database. He goes, you know how easy that is? My kid can do it. He's 12, right? And so his view is by the way, still somewhat true. Banks still charge all kinds of crazy fees for stuff, right? And so one conception of his version of the company, which at the time when he named it was called X.com, was X.com was just going to like cut all the fees, cut all the transaction fees and time out of moving money around. Because why pay it if there's nothing happening other than a few bits being moved from one database to another?
No, it's fantastic.
I'm sure that spurs a lot of, I mean, you're a lot more learned on these topics than I am, but just suffice it to say again, where I'm drawing my research from is my interviews with these people, these were the same things they were thinking about and talking about back then.
Yes. Did Peter Thiel have any specific suspicions of who Satoshi was, or was he just saying
we didn't get that deep into it? Partly because my book was not a book about Bitcoin. It was but he actually told it in a funny way. He's like, yeah, I think I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, you know that story about how like, if you're drunk and you drop the keys, like, you know, you sort of look for the keys in the last likely place that you would suspect to find him. He goes, the most likely place where you're going to find somebody like Satoshi is at the IFCC, whatever that conference is in Anguilla. He didn't name names.
Yeah.
I never pressed. But his view was like, there were only a handful of people who were thinking about digital currencies this seriously, and they were all attending these conferences. And so in a universe in which those conferences are where the action is, it's probably where Satoshi was.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think PayPal too, you know, by, I guess, digitizing money to some extent, not completely. I think Bitcoin does it completely. It's like you have like digital gold now, which is obviously a step further than what PayPal went. But the introduction of PayPal introduced a competitive threat to banking.
Oh, for sure.
So now you see it induced a competitive response, right? You see things like Zelle. You see things like these fintech overlays that give you free wire transfers. So again, back to sucking out the transaction costs. It's like, well, PayPal sort of put them on their back foot, so to speak, and said, you know, we can move money more cheaply. And if you don't adapt, well, then we're going to eat your lunch. And so now banks, it's been very slow to happen. And like still today, you know, some banks do charge wire fees and whatnot, but you see it going that way, that we are moving towards a world where you can move money much more cheaply. And then obviously Bitcoin takes us to an extreme. I mean, you can move billions of dollars for pennies or a few dollars, depending on the demand on the blockchain at the time, basically how many transactions are flowing.
And I think the difference also just in and again, I'm not any kind of expert on cryptocurrencies. I want to just be completely clear. I own them. I enjoy playing around with them. I am conversant in the space, and I also like in the same way I like embracing other technologies. It was great to embrace them early because it just gave me a chance to see what the ecosystem in the space were like and meet people and have conversations about it. And also, I think I've paid for stuff with cryptocurrency. So I wanted to see if it would work, right? There's one thing that in many ways PayPal did that Bitcoin also has achieved to its own. The big problem in creating a money system that I learned from doing the PayPal book is not money transfer. It's secure money transfer. Right. And so part of what PayPal was battling is fraud. So if you create any kind of system of exchange where like goods, services, or values being exchanged, the problem isn't good actors. It's really, 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 really bad actors. Right. And so PayPal's great innovation was described to me by a couple of different people who worked there. They said, what people think PayPal is a system of sending you money by email. No. They said what PayPal is actually, that's the tip of a very big iceberg. And the iceberg is fraud detection and fraud fighting. And they said, so the real challenge in any payment system is security and it's trust. Can I trust that when I give you $5, it's actually $5, right? The US Mint has its way of solving that, right? It's got certain security protocols built into the manufacturing of money. PayPal had its own way of figuring that out. They would do things like if you tried to pay and your payment was connected to a credit card, they would backstop with your bank account information so that they knew there was another way to make sure that you were paying for real, right? They built fraud fighting teams. So I interviewed a bunch of the fraud fighting teams that a bunch of the fraud fighting analysts who were part of the fraud fighting team that made sure that money and goods went where money and goods were supposed to go, right? They used the law. The law at that time on cybersecurity was very much in its infancy, but they went and they would work with DAs or they would work with like the FBI or they would work with government institutions to make sure that there wasn't money going around to places it shouldn't go. That is the great challenge. And I am not well enough versed in the space to know how Bitcoin has figured that out. But my sense is that there has been more attention paid to that challenge. And that's why there's more adoption today than there might have been of something like a DigiCash.
Yeah, I think you're describing different versions of the double spend problem, basically, where someone, you know, sends money and then tries to perform a chargeback or doesn't send the goods. Like, it's basically where you're trying to either spend money that you don't have or re-spend money that you had once but you already spent once.
Yep.
And so all of this fraud detection and mitigation is really just different strategies for dealing with that. And Bitcoin does fix that completely, because when you what it doesn't fix is the actual exchange of goods. You're not going to guarantee that someone's goods were delivered, but you are going to guarantee that the money went there and it's not coming back. And it's, you know, it's like I handed you the gold coin, but we did it online versus in person.
Yeah.
And so that's a really big deal and is interesting.
And by the way, the other thing is that's like, it takes nothing away from call it like the front end or the part of it that is the user interface.
Exactly.
Because you're right. It was actually a very big leap. So like sort of, there's probably some people listening who weren't even born in 1998, which kind of freaks me out, right? But let's say you're like around in 1998 and you're of a certain age where you can buy stuff. You go online. When I did my reading about this period and like really went back and looked at old articles and interviewed people were terrified to input credit card information into computers at that time.
Yeah.
They thought somebody would steal it.
Yeah.
They thought it was like crazy risky. No. I went and looked at old versions of the Wells Fargo site. You couldn't even do banking on the Wells Fargo site for years, right? Yeah. Because they thought it was too much of a risk. PayPal had to come around and push the medium forward.
Yes.
It had to make people okay with entering in their credit card information and knowing that like the money would get to where it was going to go. And if it didn't, you had some kind of backstop or some kind of protection involved. And so it's not a small thing to like get people to overcome that level of like mistrust, right?
Yes.
And so I'm not taking anything away from that. It's more of your assessment is right, which is like they pushed the ball forward. And like there's a couple people who lamented when PayPal sold to eBay in 2002. They were like, oh, the dream died. We didn't create the global world currency, right? But like it was a massive achievement to get tens of millions of people to email money to each other. And was it Bitcoin? No. But was it a huge leap in digital payments? Absolutely.
And was it maybe, I mean, possibly even necessary for Bitcoin to get off the ground, right? People needed some level of familiarity with digital money before they would take the next step, which is this like actual digital bearer money, if you will. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.